Okay, good morning, everyone. I think we will start now. I'm sure there are a few more people at the front door waiting to enter. We'll let them in slowly. Thank you very much for joining ERE's third forum this season. We've been doing a series of public forums during this MCO period, and I find that during the MCO period, people have a lot more time in their hand, are more willing to discuss and meet. And also it is a good way of keeping people productive and occupied. For the session this morning, we'll be focusing on terrestrial and marine biodiversity. And we have three other sessions, one this afternoon on environment and business, and then two sessions on Monday on adaptation to climate change, as well as managing pollution and waste. For this morning, we have three very interesting speakers. Three speakers that I have carefully chosen for their breadth of experience and their ideas. First, we have one Wong Abdullah. Ivy is currently the Senior Vice President and the Head of Environment Impact Area at Yayasan Hasanah. So Ivy is responsible for the environmental pillar at Yayasan Hasanah. They fund many projects throughout the country, and I'm sure Ivy will share this with us later. So before joining Yayasan Hasanah, Ivy was managing the environment portfolio at the Iskandar Region Development Authority in Johor. And before that, she spent many years in civil society, including at WWF. So Ivy is quite well versed in most of the environmental issues, and we are pleased to have her with us this morning. Our second speaker is Dylan Jeffrey Ong. Dylan is a very, very interesting person. He used to work with ERE, of course, many years ago, an engineer by training, but his expertise is actually in biodiversity. And Dylan has worked in many areas in the country. And in recent years, he's also authored several books. And two of his guidebooks of Taman Negara and Endarompin are very popular. I think maybe after this forum, you can go and look up those two guidebooks, which are very well written. And we are happy to have Dylan here with us today. Our third speaker is Julian Hyde. Julian is the general manager of Reef Check. Reef Check is an NGO that focuses on the marine ecosystem. Julian himself has been working in Malaysia for the last 20 years. When I first met him, he was running a dive center in Pulau Tioman. Yeah. So it explains his passion for Tioman. Reef Check is also well known for their annual coral reef surveys, which have been undertaken for many years, and they use a lot of volunteers to do their reef surveys. So if you are interested in volunteering to do reef work, you can contact Julian after this. And of course, I'm your moderator. My name is Bala. I'm from ERE Consulting Group. Once again, before we proceed, I ask you to please mute your microphone and video at all times, except when I ask you to speak, because even one person with a microphone on can disrupt the entire session, right? So please keep your microphone off, as well as your video off. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the speakers, I just want to share some very basic information with you to set the tone for this morning's discussion. As you all know, we are very, very rich. Malaysia is a very rich country when it comes to biodiversity. We are richer than Jolo and Donald Trump put together. That's how rich we are. So no matter what list you see, Malaysia is always the top 12 or the top 15 or the top 17 most biologically rich countries in the world. So from plants to animals, from insects to birds, we have it all. And what a lot of people don't realize is that we truly depend on our biodiversity for our daily needs and to sustain life. From the clean water that the forest guarantees us to flood protection that the upper catchment affords to food supply. Without our bees and insects, our fruit industry will collapse. Without this little red palm weevil, our oil palm industry will collapse. Our tourism industry depends so much on our biodiversity. Our national parks, islands, wildlife attract so many tourists from all over the world, and this sustains our very large tourism industry, of course. But at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, we have already lost a big chunk of our heritage, and we continue to lose them every day. Our forest cover, our biodiversity, our coral reefs and fish, wild animals continue to decline despite all the work done by government, private sector, NGO, despite all the good initiatives that's being undertaken, we are still losing our heritage. And the world is changing. And with this change, we expect greater pressures on our biodiversity. Population is changing very fast. The number of people in Malaysia is increasing. We expect 14 million more people by 2050. The rate of urbanization is increasing. So the population increase will put a big pressure on our biological resources. The second change that we need to prepare for is climate change. Climate change affects our lives in many ways. Similarly, it affects biodiversity through its impact on habitats, on weather, and so on. And the third change that we should anticipate is technology. And technology is changing very rapidly and is affecting everything that we do, including this forum. Yep. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we have three very experienced speakers to share their views with them. So with that, let me just stop sharing the screen and get back to your main screen. To start off our session, I'm going to call upon our first speaker, which is Puan Ivy Wong Abdullah, who is a very experienced professional in this field. Hi, Ivy. Good morning.
Hi, Bala. Good morning, everybody.
Great to have you with us today. Since you are the most seasoned person, I'm going to ask you to share your views. I think first you can share with us what you do. What does Yayasan Hasana do in this field? But then what I really like you to focus on then is, based on your experience and the work that you do now, what are likely to be the key challenges in conserving biodiversity over the next 2 decades? Given the rapid globalization, the changing economy, the expanding population, and climate change, what are going to be the key challenges for us to protect our biodiversity in the coming decades? So let's look forward. I know we have problems in the past. So what are going to be the greatest challenges in the next 20 or 30 years? Yes, Ivy, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Bala. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I hope everybody can hear. So a bit of introduction about Yayasan Hasana. So we are an impact-based foundation. We were established in July 2015. So we are quite, in a sense, young in its growth. And we are basically a grant-making organization. So we give grants to civil society, NGOs that are working in our 5 focus areas. So as Bala explained, I'm responsible for the environment impact areas. And within that impact area, we look primarily at ecosystems. And so this covers forests, the rivers, and also our marine ecosystems, looking more towards conserving and protecting these precious ecosystems. And how do we involve local communities in towards improving their quality of life and support this vision of ours towards conservation of our precious ecosystems. Within the last 2 years, Hasana has already prioritized or has prioritized the Central Forest Pine as our sort of focus areas. And we look at Central Forest Pine more as a geography in terms of where we want to see more changes and more conservation outcomes to be achieved. So this is something that we have set our organization's goal towards. So this is going to be a long-term goal, 5 to 10 years. How do we achieve sustainable development within these landscapes and also have a balance in terms of conservation outcomes? So back to your question, Bala, on the challenges. I don't have a crystal ball with me, so I can't predict what we will see in terms of Malaysia will be in the next 30 years. But personally, what I want to see is crystal clear and clean water flowing through our rivers from the headwaters to the sea. I want to see wildlife thriving in our forests and also in our marine ecosystems. And I think what would be great is also an efficient and sustainable food production system in our country that is that will allow us to be self-sustaining. So efficient and also sustainable. So if we have all this, it would be quite an achievement for Malaysia. And to get there, we need to really identify, acknowledge, and also act on present challenges today. So I think in a lot of the work that we do in towards conservation, the underlying factor for all our challenges is people. How do we deal with people? How do we work with people? And how do we engage with people? As a conservationist, we need to engage with all sectors of society, be it policymakers, civil servants, local communities, private sectors, NGOs, CSO, etc. So everybody has a role to play in delivering an environmental outcome that we want to achieve. We have to engage and we have to make it relevant and connect it to their systems. So I think we have to look at this from our education systems that we need to probably change. We need to look at our value system, that there is a lack of appreciation for nature presently. How do we change that? And knowing that it plays a very important role to play in our lives. So I think in moving this key issue on challenges, Malaysia needs to look at a change in how we do things. We need to innovate for the better. We need to look at new approaches to look at how we manage our protected areas. And traditionally, it has been a government's role. So maybe we should shift towards looking at a co-management approach, working with communities or private sectors in terms of managing an area to achieve a conservation outcome. We need to look at more transparency and openness and accountability in how we monitor our forest. And, as the saying goes, people outside the country can see what's happening inside through satellite imagery rather than us in the country. So I think we need to be able to accept change and we need to move on with technology. We also need to look at how we are managing our ecosystems, how we are valuing them, and how we are towards better measures to protect them. We need to look towards having more people on our side, looking at champions. They need to understand what the role and the services that the ecosystem provides to the people. Therefore, then they will be your champions. And just imagine a young voter writing to your member of parliament demanding protection for the forest or ecosystems that it is within their jurisdiction. So that would be a great change to have. So there is a need to engage with people more. And also we need to show more results of what we can achieve at the ground level. And we need to also replicate and multiply those. So I think the word is, as a conservationist, or you can call yourself an activist, you have to be pragmatic as well and not be too much of a purist in the sense that you need to engage with the other side as well. So I think that has been what my experiences over the last 20 years or so working in conservation. So I think I will stop there for the time being and pass it back to you, Bala.
Thank you, Ivy. That was a great opener. I think you mentioned many things. From what came out very strongly is partnerships. I think we need to engage everyone. And like you said, the other side, I used the term the dark side before. Yes, I think without engagement with the other side, without partnerships with government, civil society, private sector, local communities, we are not going to achieve much.
Yes.
Yes, I think that partnership is absolutely vital. And I believe Yayasan Hasanah is encouraging partnerships. Knowing from your projects, you are trying to cultivate that. You want to add a bit more on how you're encouraging partnerships?
I think a lot of the work that we do, we work with various types of groups, from the work on advocacy, the work on engaging with communities. We work with different types of partners that work with different type of beneficiaries. So I think an example I have is working with Global Environment Center towards protection of the Ulu Kinta Basin. And that is where they are working closely with the local government, as well as the federal government and the local community towards adopting and protecting the Sungai Kinta. So I think that is quite a tremendous effort in the sense of getting the buy-in from the people towards that particular goal. So in a lot of the projects that we support, the main element is how do we work with other parties? How do we collaborate? A more recent project that we are going to start very soon is that on identifying ecosystem services. I think that has been identified as quite a clear sort of a need for quite a fair bit of forest managers in Peninsular Malaysia in the CFS. So we are working to build the capacity of those forest managers and invite all who are quite keen to be involved in that project and come and join the teams when they go to each state in Peninsula. I'll stop there if there's any other questions.
Okay, Ivy, thank you. We leave it at there. So everyone, if you have questions for Ivy, please use the chat function to ask your questions. We'll pick up the questions later. I'm moving on to Dylan now. Of course, Dylan has had a very interesting career. I think most of his work has been on the terrestrial ecosystem. He's very well versed with national parks and everything terrestrial. So Dylan, again, you may want to share a bit about the work that you do. I know you've done many different and strange kind of work. But more importantly, what are your views about the key challenges in conserving biodiversity in the next 20 or 30 years? Yep. Given the fact that the whole world is changing. Go ahead, Dylan.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Bala. Thank you for inviting me, and good morning, everybody. Name is Dylan. I'm a freelance environmental consultant. My interest is in writing guidebooks, mainly for natural parks, natural areas, that kind of thing. Basically, introducing Malaysia's nature, to a wider audience in a way that everyone can understand. Nature is not just for people who are really into birds or plants. It's that's sort of my area of interest. So to answer that first question, I simply put, I think it basically the same thing we've been doing, the same challenges we've been facing for the past 2 decades. Empowering local communities, getting more boots on the ground, getting more protected areas established. Reducing impacts of human activities on biodiversity. Also the different things. Maybe some things are more become more to the fore than others. One thing I can think of is climate change. It's becoming more of a pressing issue, and what people don't seem to realize is that it's linked to biodiversity in many, many ways. Biodiversity helps protect us from the impacts of climate change in many different ways. But what I'd like to focus on first here is something that has been a target for Malaysia for many, many years, I think at least 20 years, which is to secure 50% forest cover in the country. Now this, I've got some slides. I can try to put it on. Okay, I hope everyone can see this. So the first thing I'd like to say that when we talk about biodiversity, it gets a bit confusing. So I want to try to just reduce the confusion at first. When we talk about biodiversity, we tend to view it from three different aspects. One, in terms of composition. Usually people talk about how many species there are. When we talk about ecosystems, we can also talk about how many different ecosystems there are. We can view it from a structural aspect. Things like the CFS, the Central Forest Spine, address structural aspects of biodiversity. And the third way we need to look at it is in terms of processes. The processes that occur within ecosystems between the different living things. So in terms of terrestrial ecosystems, in general, what we're talking about in Malaysia is tropical rainforests. That's the general term for the vegetation that we have. But it's not the same everywhere. We have different vegetation types or ecosystems depending on a number of factors, depending on the soil, depending on elevation, and depending on human disturbance. So some of the main ecosystems in Peninsular Malaysia, this is an old chart. The ecosystems are there, mangrove, beach vegetation, and all that kind of thing. So when we are tracking ecosystems, we look at what was originally there and how much of it is left and how much of it is protected at the moment. So what has happened is that when towns and cities developed, we developed in the lowlands. So a lot of the lowland ecosystems were lost. Lowland Dipterocarp forests, peat-swamp forests, that kind of thing, were lost to development. And what we're left with, protected within forest reserves and national parks, are things that are higher up in the mountains, in the steep lands that development cannot touch, cannot reach. So overall, what I want to say that our ecosystems are complex. We are one of the most diverse, biological diverse countries in the world. It's an old saying, one hectare of forest in Malaysia has more trees than the whole of Canada, something like that. You know, that's just how diverse, and it makes it complex. It makes it difficult to to understand and to manage. However, when we go back to that 50% of forest cover, we are talking about we are reducing what is a complex ecosystem of rainforest into forest. And so back to this pledge, it was first made by Mahathir at the Earth Summit in 1992. It was a pledge. It was, you could argue that it was voluntary, and whether it's still valid or not. But time and time again, we hear people in the government bringing up this pledge, reminding us that we have this pledge. And in the last year, the previous Ministry of Natural Hello? In the previous Ministries of Natural Resources Strategic Plan, they actually brought up the strategy mengekalkan 50% litupan kawasan hutan negara. That 50% was for the first time I've seen a government strategy. I'm not sure what the new government thinks about this. A 50% target is really good, I think. Why 50%? Whether it's a good figure, should it be 60, 40? I don't know, but we have that 50% target. But it's more complicated than that, okay? Because when we talk about 50% of land area under forest cover, the definition of forest cover does not take into account biodiversity. And this is not due to any fault of Malaysia. It's basically most of the international forest definitions are area-based. So the most widely accepted one by the Food and Agriculture Organization says that a forest is anything, any piece of land greater than half a hectare. 1 hectare is a football field. 1 hectare is about a bit bigger than a football field. So it's about half a football pitch. With trees higher than 5 meters, covering 10% of that area. That is considered a forest. So if you look at that matrix on the left, the trees are the ones shaded. Something like that is considered a forest. Okay, so forest is not what you the definition of forest is not what you might think. If you look on the right, the definition of forest includes natural forests, even areas that have been clear cut, but is meant to be forests in the future are considered forests now. Rubber plantations, if the plantation is meant for wood production, then it is also considered forest. It can be considered forest. And seedlings of young trees. So 50% of land area under forest cover, it may not all be forest. So it gets complex. How do you measure this forest cover? It depends who you ask. Okay, so the governments of countries would measure it based on land status. It doesn't matter whether it's covered with trees or not. If the land says it's supposed to be forest, then it's part of your forest. It's very different if you measure it by, say, if you're looking at a satellite image and what looks like forest. You get quite different figures. Then it gets even more complex. How do we decide? So every state wants needs to clear forests and all that. How do we decide how much forest each state needs to set aside, right? Say if a state in East Malaysia sets aside 60%, that's just slang or 30%. How is that fair? And should the federal government compensate the states based on how much forest they set aside? At the moment, they don't. And as far as I know, there is no strategy for that. So I shall stop sharing here. And okay, I'll leave it at that. Actually, I would just like to add that it's not all bad, not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of good things happening in Malaysia, believe it or not. There's a lot of people doing really good work. You might not have heard of it. What we need to do is take these models and make them more mainstream, make them the norm. I guess that is one of the key challenges of the next 2 decades. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dylan. Dylan, just to recap what you said, I think your main point was, I think, defining what is forest, ensuring a fairer distribution among states, and ensuring a better representation of different ecosystems. Those are very crucial issues.
Yeah.
Right? And you think these issues will continue into the next 20, 30 years? In 2050, will we still be facing these issues?
Well, depends depends how serious we are in tackling them. They could go on forever. I don't know.
Okay, we'll come back to the question later in the session. I think there were several questions by Casey Lee and Ling Lee. You just hold on to your questions first. Let us finish with Julian, and then we'll come to your questions. So Julian, your turn next. You've been working in the marine ecosystem for a very, very long time. I think you are one of those most experienced marine conservationists in the country now. So can you share a bit of what Reef Check does, and then move on to answer the question about what do you think are the key challenges in biodiversity conservation in the coming 20 to 30 years, particularly the marine sector? Julian?
Okay, thank you, Bala, and good morning to everybody. Like Dylan, I'm just going to show a few slides, but there's only really 3 important ones. So what does Reef Check do? Reef Check is a monitoring program. So we monitor the health of coral reefs, but we also then trying to use that data for improving management, empowering local communities, educating people, getting people involved. We work with all sorts of stakeholders to make this happen. We work with federal government, with marine parks. We work with state governments. We work with local island stakeholders, communities, resort operators, dive operators, to try and get people involved and get them to understand and get them to participate. And you can read that slide while I'm talking. That basically says it all. Why do we do this? Because coral reefs, like Dylan's forests, are very important ecosystems. They're important ecologically for their biodiversity. They're important economically for the jobs that they create and the food that they supply. So that kind of underpins what we do. That's a given. And I was looking at the list of participants earlier on, and I think a lot of people understand that already. So I hope I'm not preaching to the converted too much. So 3 things. What's going wrong? What can we do about it? And what are the challenges? So what we tend to do is to separate threats to problems with coral reefs into 2 areas. Global threats like climate change, global warming, ocean warming, which is happening right now. One of my colleagues from Tierman reported just yesterday evening that they're starting to see bleaching. There is another bleaching event happening, but there's nothing we can do about that as a small, locally managed, locally run, locally involved NGO. So we have to look at the local threats, destructive fishing, stupid tourism, overfishing, lack of participation. Our surveys have shown that live coral cover in Malaysia has decreased by about 5% over the last, actually not 10 years, even in the last 5 years. Just chipping away at it little by little by little. Dylan was questioning how you measure forest cover. Well, we've been going to these sites now for 10, 12 years, and we have a pretty good idea of what's going on. And this decrease over the last few years has been pretty consistent, and it's a concern that we need to do something about. So we can't manage the global threats, but what we can do is manage the local threats. And that's the key to what Reef Check is trying to do now. What we want to do, what we need to do to conserve these important ecosystems is build the resilience so that they are healthier and they are more able to withstand external shocks. So there's 3 parts to this. One is we've got to reduce physical impacts. We've got to manage tourism better. Last year, at the beginning of the year, some people will recall Storm Pabot hit the northeast coast. It did a lot of physical damage to shallow reef areas. How do we respond to that? We can't. The shallow reefs are not like Lego blocks. You can't rebuild them, but you can reduce all of the local impacts so that there is a greater chance that they will recover. Tourism is one of those things. It's going to be very interesting to see at the end of this year what impact there has been from zero tourism. Of course, the economic impact is terrible, but perhaps we can see some improvement in the reefs that we can learn from. Do we need to build new airports on the islands? Do we need to be bringing more people to the islands? Can't we focus on ecotourism instead of mass tourism? These are questions that urgently need answering. We need to cut down pollution, which includes nutrients from sewage and agricultural runoff, because that affects water quality, and one of the biggest determinants of reef health is the quality of the water. The better the water quality, the healthier the reefs. And finally, we need to control fishing because fishing changes the ecological balance on the reef. If you take out the algae grazers, you get coral algae growing, and therefore the reef is less healthy. And then we need to fix climate change, of course. So the challenge is, what's stopping us achieving all of that? First of all is a lack of awareness of the importance of coral reef ecosystems, despite all the work that we have done, that other NGOs like WWF have done, the small ones like Jawara Turtle Project, Langtonga Turtle Watch, everybody trying to educate people about how important reefs are. I think we still have some fairly fundamental lack of awareness of what's going on. We also lack awareness of the value of ecosystems. So without understanding how valuable they are, we don't think twice about destroying them. Why are we still talking about building airports on the islands? Why are we still talking about reclaiming land off the coastline when there's potentially important coral reefs under there? So we've got to get awareness all the way through government, all the way through business. Decision makers need to understand that if you damage these things, they've gone. And that has a cost, not to the developer, but to everybody else, which is one of the problems. Second challenge is joined up government doesn't exist. Marine parks is in fisheries. Marine parks section is within fisheries, which is under the Agriculture Ministry. Environment, natural resources, biodiversity, they're all in separate places. How can we ensure that a resource like coral reefs or even marine ecosystems, including seagrass beds, including mangroves, are managed in an integrated way? If we don't have a centralized decision-making process, a centralized source of information, then it's going to be difficult to get a consistent, coherent strategy across all parts of the ocean. I think we need more stakeholder participation. This has already been mentioned a couple of times, but we have found that if you get the local community involved, then you start to see improvements in marine resource management. It's not an accident, it's what actually happens. And there are plenty of examples from countries including Philippines and Indonesia where community-based management can be shown to be very successful. I want to touch on COVID because we are already seeing a major challenge now. We are getting increasing reports of fish bombing in Sabah, in Pom Pom, and in Tunku Abdul Rahman Park, and in Mantanani. We are getting reports of increasing turtle egg poaching in Perhentian. We're getting reports of increasing fishing in Tierman. And frankly, you can't blame these guys because tourism just disappeared. Their jobs just disappeared. What are they going to do about feeding themselves and their families? They have to rely back onto the natural resources that they're used to using. And we need to be thinking about that. How are we going to respond in terms of creating non-tourism jobs? How are we going to change the tourism industry so it's more sensitive and resilient to these things? And what are we going to do about population control, the big elephant in the room? Let me end briefly with my wish list. I'd like to see an integrated oceans policy covering all marine ecosystems, covering all industrial uses, fisheries, seagoing, ocean transport, and I'd like to see community participation at the center of that. I'd like to see one agency responsible for oceans. I'd like to invest in education so that more people understand how important reefs are and other marine ecosystems are. I'm particularly looking at education and jobs on the islands because those communities are directly interfacing with the reefs. And I think we should be moving away from mass tourism and focusing more on ecotourism. The value is much higher, the impact is much lower. And one last thing, I watched the scariest move I've ever seen yesterday, Planet of the Humans. It's Michael Moore's latest effort. Have a watch, but it's fairly depressing stuff. That's it for me for now. If anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Julian. I think one of the themes that you raised is about stakeholder participation and community engagement, which again mirrors what Ivy said, which I personally think is very important. And we will talk specifically about that in a short while. But since you brought up COVID-19 and the impact on the marine ecosystem, would you like to share with us what are you seeing on the ground, or what are you hearing from the ground, the impacts of COVID-19 on the marine ecosystem, the fish bombing and livelihood issues?
In Mantanani, where we've been working for about 6-7 years, tourism has increased from about 50 people a day to 3,000 people a day since about 2012. Obviously, in my opinion, 3,000 a day is not sustainable. But as it has grown, the locals have had more and more participation in tourism. Whether it's just but selling fish to the tourists who are there just for the day, lobsters 6-8 inches big for several hundred ringgit, or whether it's operating homestays, they have come to rely quite heavily on tourism for their household livelihoods, household incomes. That tourism has simply disappeared. There are 0 tourists on Mantanan. There are none. So all of the 25 day trip operators who were employing locals from the island, they're gone. Those jobs have gone. The people who are working in homestays, those jobs have gone. The people who are leading dives, people who were guiding snorkeling tours, gone. Not a single person on Mantanani now has a job apart from the few people that we employ. So just imagine, you know, yourself, your own family, your own community. All of a sudden, nobody has a job. They're not good at saving. They're not good at financial responsibility. They're island communities. They're not wealthy. So what are they doing? They're feeding themselves by fishing. It's the only resource they have. So they're going back to fishing. And the same is true on Pulau Tierman. The same is true on Pulau Perhentian. And this is, I'm not just making this up. This is what we're hearing reports from the field. People are telling me that the locals in Perhentian are now digging out turtle eggs to sell on the mainland so they can buy food. So yeah, the impact is real and it's happening right now today. I do not know what to do about it. All I know is that we need to react to prevent it happening in the future by building the resilience of the communities, by training them in non-tourism jobs, and I don't mean fishing. But you know, what else can we have them do that earns them a living outside of using the natural resources we're all trying to protect?
Thank you, Julian. I believe there were several questions for all the 3 speakers, particularly for Ivy and later for Dylan. Casey Lee, you have been very active in the chat forum. Would you like to ask your question? Casey Lee? Okay. Okay, Casey is asking, how do I do it? Just unmute your microphone. Okay, while waiting for Casey to learn how to unmute his microphone, I just want to move on to a related topic. I think all of us here are familiar with the National Policy on Biodiversity, which was launched in 2017 by the Prime Minister then. Of course, the document covers everything under the sky and as far as biod is concerned. But what I like to ask all 3 of you is the policy adequate? Has it served its function? And what do you think of its implementation? Yep. Ivy, would you like to go first?
Okay, thank you, Wala, for that leading question. I think, as we know, Malaysia, we have great policies. I think globally we are known to have very in-depth reports, policies that have been written. But unfortunately, in regards to this particular policy, there's a huge lack of ownership in this particular policy that leads to poor implementation. So we see quite a few sort of agencies that are very compartmentalized, and they are mostly working in silos, and there is a trend to not to share data. So there's a sort of a lack of action to take on more responsibilities. So the policy by itself is great. It is quite an achievement in having its 5 goals written up, its 17 target sets, and 57 actions. So it's quite an in-depth look at it. Is it adequate? Is it getting us where we want to? I don't think we're there yet. It's not achieving anything significant, but we still have another 6 years to go. So the policy is from 2016 to 2026. But if we are to revise the policy, it should have to be an upward trajectory, not a watering down of our policies, and really look at how do we work to get those actions implemented. There is a huge, I would say, the challenge in terms of securing buy-in or mainstreaming the policy with other ministries. It's currently at the domain of the previous NRE CATs, and now it's I think it's under it has a new ministry now, and so the ministry needs to mainstream this with other ministries and getting their participation, because this policy cuts across all ministries, all sectors, and I think that it's quite an important aspect. I think that's a bit of my sharing for the time being.
It's seen as NRE or cat's baby and not given due attention by other ministries which are equally responsible for biodiversity protection. Dylan.
Okay, hi, Dr. Bala. Honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with the policy at all. It's perfectly fine. It still seems like a new policy to me because I don't hear very much about it. The thing about Malaysia is we love policies. We've got a policy for everything. It looks nice on the shelf, and then we forget about it until it's time to write a new policy. I think the worst thing you can do, the worst thing the government can do right now is to hire a consultant to review or revise the policy. Don't do that. That's a waste of money. It just implement it. It's there. What are the things that you need to do to implement it? Who are the people who need to know about it? Who need to get it endorsed? I remember a while back there used to be, I'm not sure whether there still is, there used to be a National Biodiversity and Biotechnology Council, and policies like this be tabled at the council, and the council is made up of I think it's chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister. Council members were Menteri Besar, Chief Minister of all states. So by getting all of these Menteri Besars to endorse it via the council, they have no reason to say, I don't know about it. Okay, everyone knows about the policy. The other thing is the budget. There was a study done less than 10 years ago that compared the amount of funds each country set aside for biodiversity. So Malaysia was ranked one of the lowest. It had one of the highest biodiversity, but one of the lowest amount of funds budgeted for management of biodiversity. So if you don't have any budget to implement the policy, it can't be implemented, right? So going back to the previous question on what would happen after COVID, my worry, to add to Julian's what's already happening on the ground, is that there'll be no more money. Already biodiversity is, management is probably one of the smallest portions of the federal budget every year. Last year, there was some additional money given. That was the first time, I think 60 million or something like that, for states to manage protected areas. I'd like to see what the allocation will be for the next budget, whether it will be tied to the policy as well. If there's no money, what can you do?
Dylan,
yes.
Since you brought a topic of budget and money, the COVID crisis has sort of turned the entire budget upside down. How do you see this affecting budget for BioD in the coming years?
Well, if rightfully the government had to spend money on things that need money to be spent on, and if it's getting the economy off the ground and all that kind of thing, for sure. I think we still need the money from somewhere, be it the private sector. The other thing about Malaysia, I think until now, private sector involvement in funding biodiversity has been minimal, ad hoc. Not to say it hasn't been happening. Of course there are, and people like Yayasan Hasanah have been putting money into this. But comparatively, the private sector can give a lot more, or at least before COVID, they were in a position to give a lot more for a longer period of time, rather than compared to CSR activities. CSR activities, one-off, everyone looks good, have a good time. Long-term, 10 years or more, that's what I'm talking about, commitment to biodiversity. In other countries, we see things like the private sector investing in land to keep the forest there. In Malaysia, not so much. Maybe one in Sabah. But we've never seen anything like that before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to ask questions, please use the chat function. So I know that you want to ask and I can call you. Let's move on to Julian. Julian, your take on the national biodiversity policy. Is it adequate? How's the implementation?
I'm going to use the E word, Bala, which is E for enforcement. The policy's fine. The provisions are fine. I just don't think it is being implemented. How can we be still proposing huge development projects in sensitive areas when we have a policy that says we shouldn't be doing this anymore? Tioman Island is an EBSA. It's an ecologically or biologically sensitive area. It's recognized as such by the Convention on Biodiversity. Tioman Island is one of the 50 reefs, which is a movement to protect certain areas of reefs around the world, which we simply must not lose. We're part of the Coral Triangle. How much evidence do we need to say that Tioman needs to be protected? Well, we've got all the evidence we need, and yet we are still proposing to develop it. Now, I think perhaps we have reached the point where everything we've been doing on education, everything we've been doing on awareness, everything that we want to protect biologically, maybe environment has finally got to the point where there's a conflict with business that we just are not going to be able to overcome. If you look at the movie I suggested just earlier on, Planet of the Humans, one of the things they're suggesting there is that conservationists seem to have got into bed with business, and business is funding the big conservationists, people like Bill McKibben, who are very famous. We've got Al Gore getting into bed with venture capitalists. There's a lot of stuff happening where, which seems to be a good thing, that big businesses are funding conservation, but are they really doing that? You've got to watch the movie, because they're moving into deforestation, they're moving into biofuels, they're moving into sectors that we need to keep them out of. So the policy's great, Bala, but it needs implementing. We all need to grow up a little bit. The fight between state and federal, come on, guys. Can we not move a little bit beyond that and recognize that we have joint interests? I think we have some structural problems when states are not able to raise money apart from by utilizing their natural resources. That's what they're going to do to raise money. When states can make money by allowing land reclamation, then that's what they're going to do, because states want money. So can we address some fiscal challenges here? Can the states get tax raising powers, for example? That may not be popular, but if we're talking about fiscal problems, as Dylan's talking about with budgets, what are the ways that we can raise money and involve all of these challenges and different stakeholders? And Casey, I saw your question, politics, yeah, but we're talking about politics. We can't fix these problems. We're a little NGO. We can do nothing without working with government agencies and governments and working with policies to change the way things are done. The rest of it is window dressing. I'm sorry, but that's the reality. Rant over.
Thank you, Julian. I think there are two themes that came through this. One is the role of the private sector, which we will take on in a short while. And Julian, since you brought up the issue of the federal and state jurisdiction, and I think those of us who are in this field, this is a recurring theme that biodiversity is a state matter, especially forest and water, and yet they don't have the money or the funds to manage this. Right? So we have talked about this. So obviously there are some weaknesses in the current institutional arrangements and the governance system. Let me just show you some data, might be of interest to some participants here, about how much money the states have compared to some private companies. Let me just give you a quick idea. I hope you can see this chart. So this gives you the comparison between state government revenue to selected private companies. So the blue bars are state government revenue and the brown bars are the private company, just to give you some comparison. What it tells you is, for example, Maiden makes more money in a year than most of the state governments in Malaysia, except Sarawak. Yep. Even Apollo Food, which makes the snacks, makes more money than the state of Perlis. 7-Eleven makes more money than Johor or Terengganu or Penang, right? So of course, TNB and Maybank has more revenue than all the state governments combined. So it tells you how little money is available at the state level to fund biodiversity. So my question back to the three speakers is, what do you think of the current institutional arrangement and the governance system that states have to bear the burden of biodiversity conservation, yet they don't have that kind of money to do it? Can we start with Ivy?
Thanks, Bala, for that question. I do agree that the management of our natural resources is in the hand of our state government, and they are severely lacking in terms of resources, in terms of funding, as well as technical capability as well. They need to have some booster given to them to allow them to look at managing their resources in a more holistic and in more of a sort of sustainable growth for the state. A lot of times, Malaysia's aspiration is decided at the federal level, and then it is sort of, given to the state that they have to implement. So there needs to be a shift in terms of changing that, and states should be leading in terms of what their aspirations should be in terms of managing their resources. And I think in all of this arrangements, there needs to be now a more involvement of non-government organizations in those committees, be at federal or state level, in terms of looking at natural resource management. Presently, what we're seeing in the current new ministries that are established, I think natural resources and environment is in 2 different ministries. But I think when you look at the issues of environment and biodiversity conservation, it's actually in 4 or maybe 5 ministries. It's in energy and natural resources, the water and environment, the plantation commodities and industries ministry, in the Ministry of Agriculture, and most likely in our Ministry of MOSTI as well, Science, Technology and Innovation, because we need innovation in terms of how we look at future growth for our country for biodiversity conservation. There needs to be more of an interministerial committee, and there needs to have more clear terms of reference and roles and responsibilities to implement quite a fair bit of our policies regarding biodiversity conservation. We need to get involvement of the private sectors. We need to get involvement of the NGOs into this involvement of these committees, that we see a shared, how should I say, ownership and also responsibilities for all sectors, that then we can achieve this.
Okay, thank you, Ivy. Before we move to Dylan, I think there are some questions from the participants. I'd like to call upon Dr. Casey Ngo, and after that, Lily W. So, Dr. Casey, you want to ask your question now? Dr. Casey Ngo? Or Lily? Okay, let me read out Dr. Casey Ngo's. Lily is there. Okay, Lily, go ahead. Okay, hang on. Okay, Dr. Casey Ngo first, followed by
yes,
Lily.
sorry about that. My question is, I'm not so much of a biodiversity diversity expert, but very much involved in EIA studies. Most of the times when we study the national plans and also the state structural or even local plans, we see that there is a very much disconnect in the zoning, especially on the ESA ranking one sites, whereby you cannot have this development, but in the state plans that you can see that the entire stretch has been gazetted as industrial area. So, my question is this this issue has been ongoing for a long time. We wonder whether any concrete plans to address these issues, and maybe open up for the panels to have drop some suggestions on this.
Yeah, I think what Casey is saying is there's a disconnect between the aspirations of the national policies and the aspirations at the state level. So, Ivy, give it a shot.
Yes, I think when we look at national land use policy development, it's done at the macro level. I think a lot of times the consultations or the growth of the states is not taken into account. There needs to be a more effective way in terms of putting that aspirations and making that land use policy more enforceable. I think it is gazetted as an act itself, but we see this developments happening every 5 years. There's new plans, but it doesn't reflect what's going on the ground. So I think there is a bit of a disconnect. So there needs to have a more a local. It has to go from the other way around, from bottom up to the national level policy. So that's my view for now.
Thank you, Ivy. Can I call upon Lily to ask a question now?
Okay, morning. Thank you, Dr. Bala. My question is actually for Julian. Thank you for the information, Julian. But just a quick question is, what's your thought on reef relocation or reef rehabilitation in terms of reef conservation or marine conservation? Because there must be a balance between sustainable development as well as marine conservation, especially as what you have highlighted on the ground, where Sabah is heavily dependent on tourism. So fish bombing is something that is widely acknowledged, but hardly can be enforced or controlled. And with the COVID-19 cases, like you said, they have obviously increase in these activities. So I was thinking more in terms of how can we still go for sustainable development. Can reef rehabilitation or relocation be one of the measure or to mitigate this? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lily. We are ourselves involved in some small-scale reef rehabilitation experiments, but it's never going to be more than experiments. Reef rehabilitation is not the solution to the problems with facing coral reefs because it's it's too slow, it's too small, it's too complicated. If you remember Dylan's slide on the forests, you have an intact forest, you have a felled forest, you have a plantation forest, and you have some seedlings in that one picture of his. So ecosystems are very complicated. You can't fix them. You can't put them back together again. The reason we do the reef rehabilitation is largely as an awareness raising tool to get local communities to be asking questions and to get them participating in something easy to do, and then engage them in a wider conversation about the need to conserve ecosystems. We are not doing it in the hope of rebuilding Sabah's coral reefs, because that is not going to happen. Addressing the problems caused by fish bombing needs a much bigger effort in terms of getting local communities educated, more aware, looking at alternative livelihoods, looking at better enforcement. But the solution is not to start trying to rebuild reefs, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Julian. Okay, going back to the same topic on the federal-state relationship and governance system, Dylan, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I agree with what Ivy was saying earlier. The main bottleneck is at the state government. Give you first of all, under the federal constitution, land, forest, water is a state matter. And as Dr. Bala has shown, the states have very small sources of revenue. Okay? They get their revenue from forests, from land, agriculture. They do not get anything from the rest of the taxes very much. So of course, it's a big thing to them. And in terms of institutional arrangements, at the state level is where all the action is. So for a forest reserve to be converted into a state land for other use, in most states, all it takes is for the Menteri Besar to sign off on it. There is no need for public consultation. There is no need to send it to debate in the state assembly. It's just basically one man thinks it's a good thing to do to turn this forest into something else. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. From the other point of view, there's actually a really good model of how a state can be proactive and put in place arrangements to manage its biodiversity well. And I'd just like to bring up the case of Sabah. Sabah is way ahead in terms of forest biodiversity management. In many, many ways. For example, it has a biodiversity council, a state biodiversity council, which advises the chief minister on all things biodiversity. The biodiversity council is supported by a state biodiversity center, which helps with the research and all that kind of thing. 2018 or 2018, I think Sabah came up with its new state forestry policy. And that policy is way ahead of any other forestry policies. It talks about things like payment for ecosystem services, talks about something called no net loss of biodiversity. Okay? The target of achieving no net loss of biodiversity throughout the state of Sabah. All these kind of things, it can be done at the state level, and it has to be done at the state level. Okay, I'll stop there for now.
Okay, let's pass the mic to Julian now. Julian, again, your views about the current federal-state relationship and governance system.
I know it's part of the constitution, and I know it's difficult to change constitutions, but if you want to talk about the challenges, let's talk about the challenges. The challenge is federal's got all the money, states got all the responsibility. Ivy's already said it. There should be that states have been given the responsible for managing biodiversity, but they don't have the budget for it. That graph you showed us, Bala, was scary and frightening and hilarious. But TMB has a bigger revenue than all of the states put together. How? What's their post-tax profits? How much dividend are they paying? And how much of that could instead be going to taxes paid at local level, which can then be used for biodiversity conservation? States are not going to spend money on biodiversity conservation because it doesn't make money for them. So why are they going to do it? They need money to run their own programs. They need money to run welfare programs at local level. They need schools, roads, the whole thing. But they don't have any money. So why are they going to get involved in biodiversity conservation if they don't understand it, which they don't, and that comes back to the education and awareness we were talking about earlier on. But this is one of the big changes. It's one of the big challenges, is to change this relationship between federal and states. And let's make it not a constitutional issue. Let's find another way of sharing revenues more equitably and ensuring that some of the revenue that flows to state is used for biodiversity conservation. I don't think, with respect to Ivy, I'm not sure that just getting NGOs involved is the solution, because, like I said earlier on, we can't really do all that much about it unless government engages and gets involved. And at the moment, government at state level and local level is not really that engaged. So, yeah, it's a big challenge, one that we need to start talking about.
Bala, let me jump in here.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of how should I say, change that has started within our government ministries, like Ministry of Finance. For our budget in 2019, the MOF set aside 60 million as a case for ecological fiscal transfer. And this is given to states that have a significant portion of their land under forest cover. So that was a start when this was set aside for nature conservation. And I think for our budget in 2020, MOF set aside 48 million for conservation purposes in the areas of Haru Borneo and the CFS, the Central Forest Spine. And also on top of that, I think within that 48 million is a 10 million, which is of matching grant to sort of match what the private sectors are giving to conservation that the government can match. So there has been a change in terms of how Ministry of Finance is moving towards this. And I really am appreciative of Johan at the National Budget Directorate for getting that foresight to engage with the public and the various stakeholders that are around here, and for Ministry of Finance folks as well, to really look at conservation. How do we improve on that? They're making small steps, and I think the need is for the public to really engage with them and see how we can move this. And I think they're already starting this budget 2021 engagement processes, and I think for those who are concerned, they should be involved in that process to give their input.
Thank you, Ivy. I'd like to call upon, I think, the topic between the federal-state relationship and the complexity of it, which is a major challenge for biodiversity conservation. And looking at the comments, can I call upon Cik Wan from JPS and Justin from Habitat to say something? Cik Wan, would you like to share your thoughts? And then followed by Justin, perhaps?
Hello, Doctor. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, can Cik Wan.
Well, I think hearing what Ivy said, it is true that there are changes that the federal government have been doing in that sense of late. But then, okay, there is a good development that we can see. But I think that there are still constraints that the state government is thinking. Now we can observe that state governments are more defensive over their territory, their jurisdiction, and we have to do more engagements to have them on board, especially on conservation of forests and also wetlands, so that they won't develop further. And minimize this conflict of interest between the two.
Yeah.
But I agree with what Julian has said just now. Maybe if we are deadlocked on change of the institutional setup, then we can think about other policies of more equal distribution of revenues between all entities, not only government, but we can see that the private sector have a lot to contribute to the conservationist efforts, but they are still not enough, I suppose.
Yes, and I believe this topic is not only about biodiversity, but also in the water sector. I believe we also have challenges in rationalizing the water sector because of the different jurisdiction between state and federal government. Yeah. So can I call upon Justin? Justin, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just thinking of something wise to say. I don't have anything super wise to say, but I can just say to Julian and Ivy and Dylan that, we feel you, man. We have all been working in this industry for a long time. And it's so much the case that you see wondrous progress in terms of our international role and things we've said internationally. And then we see, some very switched on and progressive policies come about. But it might as well be different countries altogether when you talk about what's actually happening on the ground. And, so something quite progressive comes up in federal ministries, but then there's no actual mechanism to translate that into real-time impact in terms of incentives and supports. So this whole business of not supporting states that are carrying the lion's share of all of our ecosystem services, in addition to our precious biodiversity, the fact that they're not being supported is just absolutely unacceptable. And this is going to absolutely compromise our future industries, economies, and development trajectory. But everybody is thinking in very short timelines, and this is fundamental to everything that's not right in this country. Can someone work on a longer than a 4-year timeline? And yeah, so that's probably where we're at. It's, you know, this business I stated about how ministries and departments are not talking to one another, right? Just take, for example, Sigari or you know, any place where there's turtle nesting beaches, right? So success is made because something happened, no more sand mining, but boom, we get some new plant coming up. And this is not unusual. This is the norm. Kuala Langat is another example. I would love to have someone speak to why that's still going on. And there are social issues as well as environmental issues. It's embarrassing as a country to be clearing peat swamp forests when everyone knows how significant it is. I think Malaysians need to know more. I think that a lot of people like us just go around with heavy hearts and heads every day. But I think our voting population, they really need to have an opportunity to comment on this and set higher targets for our governors. Okay, so that's my rant over.
Okay, thank you, Justin. I saw a comment from Ahmad Zafir. Ahmad Zafir, you are from the Habitat Foundation, right? About the need for a system for state governments to make revenue besides forests. You want to add on to that?
Yeah. So right now we see that the economy is down everywhere, country-wise or even especially for states. So after COVID, so I'm sure they'll get money. So money would normally for states like Kelantan, they'll go into logging or sand mining. So what are the other options for them? Can TNB do something? Can Petronas do something to help them to boost up the economy apart from them getting the natural resources? Yeah, I think we need to be looking into that.
Yeah, thank you, Zafir. What you say echoes that article I wrote about 2 weeks ago, that, you know, a lot of people are happy that because of the COVID-19 and the MCO, the rivers are cleaner and the birds are coming back. What I said was true. That is happening now. But once the MCO is over, you find that there'll be a lot more pressure on our environment and biodiversity because people need livelihoods, states needs revenue. So you'll find a lot more pressure on our forests and natural resources. As we come towards the end of our forum, I'm going to open up another question, which I think everybody touched, but not in detail. The role is, what can the private sector do? Are they doing enough? Can they do better? Is there any particular aspects that they can do in order to conserve biodiversity and natural resources? So the focus is on the private sector. What else can the private sector do? Let's start with Ivy.
I think for this question, you should flip it and ask Julian and Dylan. What do they think private sectors can do? Because I'm half, or more or less, private sector.
Okay, great. So in that case, we'll ask Julian and Dylan to go first.
Well ducked, Ivy. Let me try and speak a little on this. First of all, I would not want to see the private sector spending 5,000 ringgit, 10,000 ringgit each, here, there, and everywhere, because that is a waste of money. That is going to achieve absolutely nothing. If there's nothing I've learned in the last 3 or 4 years, it's that biodiversity conservation, community conservation projects require a long time, and they require long-term committed funding for 4, 5, 6 years. If somebody comes along and says, oh, I've got 5,000 here for a biodiversity conservation project, and next year we'll go over there and spend 10,000, the year after that we'll go and spend 5,000. Those little amounts of money are going to achieve absolutely nothing. So if we're going to involve the private sector, then let's make sure they're involved in a meaningful way. Having said that, I think there is more scope for private sector participation in this. I mean, again, referring to Bala's graph, yeah, okay, TNB and Maybank are exceptions. And I know that Maybank has a quite active corporate sponsorship, corporate social responsibility foundation working. Yeah, why not get them involved? But again, you need structures and systems whereby they can put money into it. Somebody was asking me yesterday how she can give money to the poor communities on the islands. And I said, go find somebody that's already doing it and make sure it's an effective system, because, you know, if your 100 ringgit isn't going to make any difference, but if you add it to 5,000 ringgit that somebody else is already putting together, then it can make a significant difference. But it has to go through an established mechanism. So I think private sector could be doing more, but I would be very wary about making sure that they got involved in the right way and that they were spending their money meaningfully. That's the best I can do.
Yep. Dylan?
Yeah, totally agree. Long term is key. Moving away from CSR and selfie, picture taking, that kind of thing. Long term, meaningful investment in biodiversity at the state level. What if a private sector comes along and says to a state, okay, you conserve this amount of forest for the next 30 years, we'll give you this amount of money annually. Hasn't been done before, I think, in Malaysia. It's been done in other countries. Indonesia, I think, receives, I think there was $1 billion grant from that was the government of Norway. But it is possible to pay the state government to set aside forests. It's not rocket science. Of course, the state government would have to adhere to certain rules, you know, for doing that. But you know, it just gives you some examples of how I think the private sector has done pretty well before in, you know, certain companies and all that. Again, in Sabah, for the past 20 years, the IKEA Foundation have invested in reforestation. They've reforested 15 to 20,000 hectares of degraded forests. After 20 years, it's perfect, beautiful forest, tall forest, and it's become a protected area. The state government, at first it was meant for logging, and because IKEA came in and the forest came back, the state government decided to turn it into a protected area. So it's now a protected area. Aside from that, there was a lot of technological transfer. A lot of people got jobs and that kind of thing. In Sarawak, a friend of ours runs a tour company. They were working with a community for 20 years, developing ecotourism with a Iban community in Ulu Batang Ai. And after initial investment and about 10 years, I think the community became rich. They got money from ecotourism and all that. And after winning the trust of the community, they could suggest how they could change the ways that they were doing their hunting. Okay, maybe we hunt in a certain area for a year, and then we give it a rest, we hunt somewhere else. And then the community progressed to become conservationists themselves. In terms of orangutan conservation, they were doing scientific research, and I think they following their work, they managed to save an area of forest from logging because of the data they had collected. So it's private sectors can come in many ways. The other one is, of course, our friends in the habitat, which Justin and Ahmad are from. Game changer, total game changer. First of all, to show that, you know, ecotourism can be really cool. We can have world-class ecotourism destination and facilities on Penang Hill and hopefully in other places that generate real revenue, sustainable revenue to the state government. Taking away that ecotourism part of it, okay, going into that. For many years, people have been saying to the state, to the government, go into ecotourism, you know, you're going to make a lot of money. But in actual fact, the states don't actually make very much money from ecotourism. All the tax revenue goes to the federal government and all that kind of thing. And the way that ecotourism has been done, the sites are really not very attractive and that kind of thing. But if you leave that ecotourism part to the private sector who know what they're doing and get you know, free money and revenue from that, the government can concentrate on the core areas what they should be doing in conservation, enforcement, or that kind of thing. It's a partnership between state and government that needs to be worked out. Yeah.
Can I, Bala,
Okay.
can I add to that briefly?
Okay, Julian, quickly, and then Ivy. Yep.
Sorry, Ivy, I didn't mean to cut in. Payment for ecosystem services, how many, okay, a tourism operator on an island or on a coastal area might be paying federal taxes on income, but are they actually paying anything for the right to use natural resources? If I'm a dive operator on an island, yeah, I get customers coming in, I get money from that, and I pay my taxes, but do I actually pay a fee, a payment for an ecosystem service that I'm getting a benefit from? So I'm taking people diving, I'm using the natural assets, but am I actually paying for the use of those? Am I paying for the upkeep of those? So maybe we ought to broaden out the use of concepts like payment for ecosystem services so that people who are actually getting a benefit from a natural system, from an ecosystem, should be actually paying it. And that money can go to state and that money can be used for biodiversity conservation. Ivy.
Okay, thanks, Julian. In response to the role that private sector can do, I think you have to look back into the core operations, looking at how they are being impacted by nature and how they are impacting nature, right? And in a lot of sense, how that a particular biodiversity is related to them. We see this a lot in big multinational companies who have gone on this trajectory of sustainability. You know, we've got the SDGs, quite a lot of the multinational, international organizations have adopted this and have sort of translated them into their operations. And we can see this in quite a fair bit of companies like Coca-Cola, who have adopted river basins. We've got seeing this in Guinness. What else have we? So they are companies that are moving towards looking at how their operations are impacting the environment in terms of water that they use and how can they minimize sort of wastefulness in their operations. So there is improvements in the company's operations to minimize usage, but also in terms of the effluence that is being released. So I think there is that need to sort of build the sustainability concept within that they do no harm to the environment where they operate. Coming back to other multinationals or those big companies, Maybank, they're working to look at tiger conservation because tiger is their symbol. So I think that they have vested interest in keeping that symbol alive, which is great. It connects to them. That's how we should look at how these things, how does biodiversity and nature relate to any private sectors. They all pump companies. I mean, majority of those who are already RSPO certified are really working to ensure biodiversity or high carbon stocks areas are in their forests surrounding the oil palm plantations and improving their practices to be compliant with international standards. So there is ways and means, but these are just big companies. So we have to shift to look at what our local companies are doing. How can we engage with them to move towards that pathway to be sustainable? A lot of this really needs to have that engagement, have the discussion. They have a role to play, but we need to make them aware of their role and the opportunity for them to play that role. So I would say don't give up on the private sectors. You have to work collaboratively with all sectors of society.
Thank you, Ivy. Ivy and Dylan and Julian, as Dylan explained, there are actually a number of success stories involving the private sector. But do you feel that in Malaysia, many of these success stories are not told frequently enough? We don't share them enough. And we only end up sharing bad news. Whereas a lot of success stories go untold. Should we make better effort? Should we put in more effort in telling and sharing success stories? Anybody wants to give it a shot?
Well, I'll give it a shot. I think we should, but in a lot of cases where you tell the achievement of a particular industry or particular company, they're a bit more reluctant because it's always a case of like you stick your head out of a hole and you're the first one to be chopped off. That kind of analogy is given. But the thing is, we should be comfortable to tell the stories and to talk about what we're achieving. But I think they need to understand also the competition among players in industries as well. So we need to build a more positive competition to get people on board rather than against each other. So just my share.
Yeah. Julian?
Yeah, I think people that do stick their head up get it shot off more easily. I'm not quite sure how to react to that one, Bala, to be honest. There are some good stories out there, but as Dylan said, you know, a lot of it is Instagram moment. You know, you get a corporate group that goes out to do a beach cleanup, and it's not actually about the beach cleanup or education. It's a jolly for the staff. They go out to the islands for a weekend. It's a weekend away from the staff. It's more of a team building effort than it is a conservation effort. This happens, and I think this is going back to what I said previously. We need long-term commitment, as Dylan mentioned as well, and that generates much better results over a period of time. So yeah, we can talk about positive results. Yes, of course we should do that, but it's a small part of the picture, and the bigger picture involves systematic system change. It involves taxation change. It involves greater education and awareness. The little bits of money that are being spent are really chipping away at the bigger problem. Are they really addressing that whole big problem? I don't know.
Dylan?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are a lot more success stories out there. Non-CSR Instagram kind of thing. I'm talking about proper on the ground, blood, sweat, and tears. It's you know, I've never done it myself. I imagine it'd be very difficult to achieve some level of success in it doesn't seem easy, conservation. So my worry is that you have little things going on here and there, and after somebody does something and then it gets burnt out and disillusion, goes away and does something else. There's no continuity. Nobody picked up on how they did it, the success factors and all that kind of thing, and it just lost. And somebody else got to build from scratch again, and you know the government has no idea what actually happened. So I mean, it goes back to another thing that I want to mention, that compared to when I first started off and now the NGO world has seemed to have changed. There's a lot of young people going into conservation work, some fresh out of uni or just had a PhD, that kind of thing, establishing a conservation NGO, doing very niche things in very young people, clever ways. I'm not sure what that is, but a new way of looking at things. So to my worry with that is I see it. I'm on some WhatsApp group with these young people. How long can they last? The older people see conservation as a volunteer thing. You're doing it for free. You're not going to get paid very much. But the COVID situation and all the funds dry out. If you have very, very small NGOs with very limited funding, how long can you last doing something like that before you need to change and sell nasi lemak, shut down that NGO? If we can keep these small NGOs, and all that, I think in 5-10 years, we see the fruits of that, labor, all the the new things that they're doing. Yeah. So, Bala.
Okay. Thank you, Dylan. While we are doing this, there are lots of people watching this live on YouTube, and there are also comments and questions there. So I'm going to just pick one question because it's very difficult to raise question from the other channel. So there's a question by Dr. Rahim Marsha from Sabah, who asked that, are we, we talk about the National Biodiversity Policy. There are 17 targets. The target 17, the last one, is often the most neglected, which is financing. We can talk until the cows come home about policy target 1 to 16. If nobody addresses target 17, nothing much gets done. So, but no doubt financing is very difficult. It has been very difficult in the past, and it's going to be more difficult in light of the COVID crisis. So I think everybody agrees without money we can't get things done. So what do you guys have to say about this? Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Ivy?
Okay, I would say we should have this aspiration to have a light at the end of the tunnel, but we have to look at innovative ways to finance our conservation programs on the ground. And in Yayasan Hasana, we are trying to look at this as one of the work tracks that we do. So engaging with people, financiers who raises bonds, or looking at conservation trust funds, learning from experiences outside that it is possible. So let's give you an example of SciCat, which is the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. So that was set up in about 4 years, and they've managed to look at raising funds both from the normal traditional ways of banks, but also through financiers and investors. So it's a lot to learn from our side, working in conservation. You need to have that financial understanding of how to make it happen. So it has to be done at a smaller scale, not at the national level. So if we want to roll this out, so we are trying to look at piloting those kind of financial mechanisms, and it's a learning journey for us, and we're slowly trying to see how we can work this out with the specific areas. There are quite a lot of philanthropic families out in Malaysia who are keen to look at conservation of their own land, and also look at new areas that they can be involved with. So I think it's just matching their what they want, what they are bringing on board to the table, and what we need to solve on the ground. So it is still a work in progress, and I think we are really trying to bridge this to look at more sustainable conservation financing for site-based solutions. So I think that's all I can say at the moment.
Yeah, maybe Julian, and after Julian, Dylan.
Yeah, I agree with Ivy. There's plenty of media coverage about green bonds. There's a lot of green bonds being issued, so there are different market mechanisms. There's also a role for the private sector, I think, and if I give you an example, we've been talking to an organization called Blue Finance. They can raise money for marine conservation projects. They've told us that they can get between $2 and $3 million US for conservation in a marine protected area, which is great, and that pays for the initial setup, the assets, and so on and so forth. But the problem then is they want their money back, like any other investor would, and there is not yet a mechanism to ring fence money raised in a given conservation area to pay it back to an external investor. If we could find a way to do that for a given island and say, okay, they will pay for the initial investments, but they will make a return from the conservation charge we collect from visitors, then we could attract a lot more finance. But we don't have that mechanism yet. And I think it's another, alongside of green bonds, it's another aspect to consider of using private sector conservation funding. You need to have a mechanism to give them a return.
Thank you, Julian. What are your views about SIMCA? Is the SIMCA model a viable model? The SIMCA in Sabah?
I think SIMCA is an excellent model. I would like to see it replicated throughout Malaysia. You have a private company, a resort company, which recognized the need for conservation, so it established a conservation structure. It pays a concession fee to state government. It raises money from visitors as a conservation charge to pay for that. It doesn't raise enough from visitors because it's only a small resort, so it has to go for other sorts of funding. But the principal mechanism, yeah, I think it's a great mechanism. I would love to take over Tioman Island.
I'm sure there are a lot of other people wanting to do the same thing for other reasons.
Probably.
Yes, Dylan. Dylan?
Okay. Yeah, I agree with all that. Just want to add something else. Very basic stuff, basic budgeting. All right. And here's an example of something close to my heart. Protected areas, national parks. When you have a national park, there are costs involved in running that park, in maintaining the facilities, operating the park, law enforcement, all that kind of thing. staffing costs. So it's not rocket science. You can do the costing, and you can allocate the budget. What I do wonder is, does the federal government see it that way, in terms of when we've got the 12 national parks here, we need to fund this, the running cost of this park, the basic thing to get this park moving, or we just maybe half, and then they're left hanging halfway to find their own selves. Otherwise, it would be a situation. I think the term is paper parks. On on paper, it's called a park, but in actual fact, there's nothing happening there. There's no management. There's no enforcement. Nothing. That might be the case in some places today. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. It's 11:45 now. We need to wrap up. I think before we wrap up, I just want to, since we spent a bit of time on financing, the session this afternoon will focus a lot more on finance and business. So those of you who are interested in this topic, you can join the afternoon session, which is this one. It starts at 3 o'clock today, and we have 3 interesting speakers to talk to us about economics, business, and protecting the environment. So you're welcome to join this session at 3 o'clock today. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. I know we talked about many things today, right? We talked about partnerships, we talked about the role of federal state governments, we talked about the role of civil society, we spoke about the need for better financing and instrumental arrangements. But what I like all 3 speakers to ask all the 3 of you is, now, in the coming decades, if there's one thing that you think we need to really focus on, what will that be? Is that financing, institutional structures, governance, or what? So what is the single most important thing that we have to do? I'm sure you're going to say that there's no single thing, everything is important, but I'm going to force you to pick one and tell us why you think that's the most important thing that we need to focus on. Starting with Ivy.
Always pick on me, Bala. I think the most important thing to do conservation work is all those things that you said are important that we need to consider, but I think the people part, that's the greatest challenge. And I think the ability to engage with the people to get to the other side, folks, and get them to see what is the role of nature, the ecosystem, the services they provide to them makes a greater impact. And then we can move to address the bigger issues. Because, yes, financing is a big issue. You can't do anything without money, but you need to move in small bits of pocket of work. Then you grow on them. But in order to do it, it's really about engaging with the people. I think that's just my input.
Thank you, Ivy. And let's move on to Dylan.
Yeah, I'm going to say something different because financing is important. But I just want to. The other thing that I think needs to be done is to review and revise the laws on biodiversity that have to do with biodiversity and conservation. Could be the main laws and all the other laws that also affect biodiversity. Law, apart from policy is not enforceable, but it directs us to where we want to go. Laws are enforceable, so that means they're very important to make sure that we go where we want to go. There are some low-hanging fruits in terms of revising it. For example, in the Kuala Langat case, we all know that the state government wanted to excise the forest because the Forestry Act of Selangor had been revised to put in a requirement for public notification. All the other forestry acts in the other states, apart from Sabah, do not have that law. It's a very basic thing, very important. Having said that, it's a very minor adjustment. You can make it stronger by saying that it has to go through the state assembly or whatever kind of thing. There are many ways that you can improve the law. I think the United States has a act that makes it illegal for a species to go extinct. That sort of turns around the whole idea of conservation on its head. So, of course, I'm no lawyer, but I think laws are very important. The other thing with laws, enforcement and adherence to the laws. And I just want to bring up the issue of patronage. When you have laws, laws need to be the same for everyone. If you have a law that says you cannot celebrate your birthday, nobody should be able to celebrate their birthday, no matter who they are. If we allow certain people to celebrate their birthday because of who they are, then we have very strange things happening. We have instances of golf courses in forest reserve, 6-star hotels in Ramsar sites, large-scale logging in catchment areas of national parks. All sorts of strange things that the law says, clearly says, cannot be done, are happening legally because the laws can be bent. So that's all I want to say about that.
Thank you, Dylan. That was quite profound. Julian.
I sympathize with what you're saying, Dylan, but I'm going to go back and support Ivy. Our experience on the islands, and we've been working on Tierman for 7 years now, and I lived there for 6 years, so we have a long, relationship with the island. If you get the local people involved and they understand why they need to do conservation, then you get much better compliance with legislation. Your enforcement needs become less because people are almost self-enforcing. It's not absolute self-enforcement, of course, but it makes the problem smaller. When you have remote areas like Tierman or Mentanani or all of the other islands, it is impossible to patrol them all the time. So enforcement becomes a question of encouraging local communities to self-enforce. So they won't do that unless they're involved in the decision-making. They won't do that unless they're involved in management. They won't do that unless they're consulted. So we need to get local stakeholders to be more of a partner in protected area management so that they can become the guardians. And if they understand the whys and wherefores, then I think that will help enormously in improving biodiversity conservation.
Thank you, Julian. And thanks, everyone. Thank you, all the speakers. We have come to almost to the end. I think some of the key points that were raised, which I completely agree. For me, I've always been a big proponent of partnerships. I think the roles of civil society, local community, and private sector in conserving biodiversity is equally as important as that of the government. And in the past, we have struggled with this. It seems like the government has to do it and everybody was a bystander. But I think in the coming years, we need to make sure this partnership is stronger. We need to find ways of bringing the private sector, civil society, and local communities on board to work together with the government to protect this. We cannot be working in isolation as we used to do. I think that is crucial. And I think we are seeing a lot of progress. I think the number of local community initiatives are increasing, the number of private sector initiatives are increasing, and the number of projects by civil society is increasing. So all this is positive, but although I agree that we are still losing biodiversity at the same time. So obviously what we are doing is not good enough. So we need to do more. And in the coming decades, I think our challenges are going to be even greater. As I mentioned, over the next 30 years, the population of Malaysia is going to increase by another 14 million people. and 14 billion people need to be fed, school, they need houses and all that. So all these are going to be great challenges that we all need to tackle. But I'm sure with the increasing level of awareness, we can all do this well. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to contact the speakers, maybe all of you might want, Julian, Dylan, and Ivy, you might want to put your email or contact details in the chat so that if anybody wants to contact you, they can do so. I know you did it earlier, but that's very high up, but you can do it again, I hope. Yep.
Ken?
Yep. So if you can put your email or contact details, I'm sure the participants would like to contact you. So you can do now before they leave. So everyone, once again, thank you very much. I hope it has been useful to you. And we hope to see you again at other forums. We have one session this afternoon. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the